March 1942. American bombers cannot hit moving ships. Less than 1 in 20 bombs even comes close. The Pacific is falling fast as Japanese convoys roam unchecked, threatening to overrun New Guinea. But while commanders despair, an Arkansas mechanic with a 6th grade education breaks every rule to build a weapon the brass will not even approve. This is the story of how desperation and defiance and a so-called banned invention changed the fate of a war, because no one expected where the next turning point would come from. The Pacific War in early 1942 was defined by disaster. The Philippines fell in May. Wake Island, once a symbol of resistance, was captured the previous December. Japanese forces surged across the map, carving out a vast zone of control from the Coral Sea to the Dutch East Indies. Their convoys steamed through the Southwest Pacific almost unopposed, landing thousands of troops and tons of supplies at Lae, New Britain, and other forward strongholds. Each new landing threatened to cut off Australia and choke Allied supply lines. American aircrews tried to fight back with the tools they had. B-17 flying fortresses, designed for high-altitude bombing, soared over enemy columns at 20,000 feet. But against moving ships, the results were almost hopeless. Bombs fell wide of the mark. Less than 5% came close to hitting. Japanese anti-aircraft fire and fighter cover made every mission a gamble. Convoys slipped through the gauntlet, untouched and unafraid, reinforcing garrisons that would soon threaten New Guinea itself. Allied commanders watched as each failed raid brought them closer to losing the entire theater. The old playbook, precision bombing from above, was not just ineffective, it was making the crisis worse. The Pacific needed a new answer, and fast. But no one in the war rooms could see where it would come from next. Paul Gunn was born in 1899 in Quitman, Arkansas, the son of a farmer and a boy who never finished the 6th grade. He taught himself engines and flight controls by watching, tinkering, and asking questions most people thought had no answer. By 16, Gunn could fix anything with a wrench and a scrap of wire. At 19, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, one of the rare men to rise from mechanic to aviator without a formal education. He spent 20 years in uniform, learning every part of an airplane from the inside out, and earning a reputation for flying low and fast, sometimes too low for comfort. Colleagues remembered him as the man who would break rules if it meant getting a broken plane in the air or a stranded pilot home. After retiring, Gunn headed to the Philippines, running a fledgling airline with his family and patching together aircraft from whatever parts he could scavenge. When war came, he used those same planes to evacuate wounded soldiers and smuggle supplies past Japanese patrols. The price was steep. His wife and 4 children were captured and interned by Japanese forces. Gunn himself barely escaped to Australia, carrying nothing but a few tools and a determination that rules and manuals didn't matter if the job demanded something more. He joined the U.S. Army Air Forces, not as a strategist or a staff officer, but as a man with a clear idea and nothing left to lose. Gunn argued that high-altitude bombing would never stop Japanese convoys. If ships were going to be sunk, bombers would have to get down low, into the weeds, and hit them where it hurt. He was ready to fight for that idea, even if it meant breaking every regulation in the book. At a dusty depot in Townsville, Australia, Paul Gunn and his team set out to change the B-25 Mitchell from a standard bomber into something entirely new. Working side by side with a North American aviation representative, they stripped out the bombardier's gear and glass nose, clearing space for a row of 50 caliber machine guns. The first conversions carried just 4 forward-firing guns, but Gunn wasn't satisfied. He and the depot mechanics scavenged more Brownings from wrecked American fighters and even captured Japanese aircraft, improvising mounts from scrap steel and aircraft parts. Soon some B-25s bristled with up to 18 forward-facing guns, enough firepower to rival 3 P-51 Mustangs in a single burst. Ammunition belts snaked through the nose, with custom feeds built by hand. Each gun's recoil required extra bracing, and the added weight forced changes in balance and handling. The modifications broke every rule in the book. Army Air Force inspectors labeled the conversions unsafe, even dangerous. Official memos called for a halt. But General George Kenney saw results, not red tape. He gave Gunn full authority to keep building, no matter what the manuals said. In the hands of Gunn's crews, the B-25 was no longer just a bomber. It became a gunship, ready for a new kind of war at low altitude. Skip bombing demanded more than clever engineering. It required pilots to master a new and deadly science. The Royal Australian Air Force had shown that a 500-pound bomb, dropped from as low as 50 feet, at over 230 miles per hour, could skip across the water's surface and smash into a ship's hull right at the waterline. Gunn's crews set out to perfect the technique, flying B-25s barely above the waves. Training flights began with cautious passes at higher altitudes. But as confidence grew, pilots pushed lower and faster, narrowing the margin for error to almost nothing. The bomb had to be released at just the right distance with the right speed and angle, or it would tumble, dive early, or even bounce back toward the plane. Every mistake carried real consequences. On January 28, 1943, a B-25 from the 90th Bomb Squadron struck a wave during practice and broke apart, killing the entire crew. Squadron logs filled with terse lines. Aircraft lost. Crew killed in action. Low-altitude skip bombing rehearsal. For every successful run, there were close calls and funerals. But those who survived the training emerged with a weapon and a skill no enemy convoy had ever faced. Signals intelligence teams in Melbourne and Brisbane picked up the first hints of a major Japanese movement on March 1, 1943. Allied code breakers decrypted messages detailing a convoy of transports and destroyers leaving Rabaul, bound for Leh. The intercepts were clear. Thousands of troops and tons of cargo would soon be crossing the Bismarck Sea. Each new dispatch, summarized in intelligence logs and passed to General Kenney's staff, narrowed the convoy's position and timetable. Updates came by the hour, guiding reconnaissance aircraft to shadow the ships from a distance. Kenney moved fast. He drafted strike orders based on the intercepts, assembling a roster of every available bomber and attack crew. At the top of the list stood the newly modified B-25 gunships. Crews were handpicked for their skill at low-level attack. Mission briefings emphasized the importance of timing and surprise. Orders were explicit. The gunships would lead the first wave, flying in at treetop height to catch the convoy off guard. Ground crews loaded ammunition and bombs through the night, while pilots studied maps and attack profiles. By dawn, the airfields around Port Moresby and Dobadura buzzed with final checks and tense anticipation. The trap was set, and every man in Kenny's command knew the outcome would rest on the next few hours. At 10:15 in the morning, the first wave of B-25 gunships swept in at 50 feet above the Bismarck Sea, engines screaming, sunlight flashing off the water. 13 aircraft lined up on the convoy, their noses packed with more than 100 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns. In a matter of seconds, over 8,000 rounds tore into the decks and bridges of Japanese ships, cutting down gunners and officers before they could react. Bombs released at close range skipped across the surface, smashing into holes at the waterline. 8 transports and 4 destroyers were hit in the opening attack. Most were burning or sinking within minutes. Survivors scrambled for lifeboats as strafing runs continued. Through it all, not a single B-25 was lost to enemy fire during the decisive low-level assault. The entire engagement, from first pass to final bomb, lasted barely 15 minutes. Of the nearly 6,900 Japanese troops who set out for Leh, only about 1,200 made it to shore. The rest were lost to the sea, strafing runs, or drowning in the chaos that followed the attack. Survivors recalled the water slick with oil and debris, the air still echoing with machine gun fire, as Allied aircraft circled back to target lifeboats and rafts. For those who escaped the sinking ships, there was little hope of rescue. The Bismarck Sea became known among Japanese crews as a death trap. It was an open warning that any convoy attempting the route would face destruction. After the battle, Japanese commanders abandoned the direct supply line to Leh, rerouting future convoys far to the north or relying on smaller, scattered runs. General Kenny's gamble on field innovation had paid off. The Pacific supply routes, once highways for invasion, were now closed by AIR power. Innovation rarely waits for permission. Today's most urgent challenges still demand bold ideas from unexpected places. Gunn's banned gunship reminds us, sometimes the difference between defeat and survival is the courage to break the rules and the vision to see what others miss. What would you dare to change?